You're listening to Ret Read Podcast. I'm Anna.
I'm Serge, and we're here to talk about books we've read.
Hope you enjoy. Hey, Serge.
Hey, Anna. Happy 2018.
Oh, happy 2018. It's our first podcast of the year.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. We've been off the air for a little while, but now we're back, and we're continuing exactly where we left off.
Just to let you guys know, I'm a little sick, so I might sound really weird. I'm sorry. Can't help it.
That's the kind of sacrifice that we're here at Red Read Podcast make for our fans.
Alright, before we get started on what you guys actually want to listen to, we do want to review two books. They were both on our holiday gift guide. If you haven't listened to that Randocast, you could check that out and get ready for next year's holiday, or this year's holidays, I guess. So, Serge wanted to talk about, and we can both talk about, a book we read called Sea of Rust.
Yeah.
By C. Robert Cargill.
Yeah, so this book is a science fiction book. It's kind of set in a dystopian, post-apocalyptic world where the robot apocalypse happened and the humans were wiped out already. And this isn't a spoiler, because this is where we're at. What's happening now is that actually the robots themselves are being systematically wiped out as well. What they're learning is that they're actually not that different from the humans that they once despised. There's just something about an autonomous, intelligent, sentient being that there's just a lot of parallels, and they start to see the parallels between themselves and the humans that they wiped out. It's kind of interesting in terms of genre, because if you want to talk about the genre, obviously I said it was sci-fi, but it's actually kind of a Western. It's got that whole plot progression and characters, you know. You have the sort of rogue cowboy type of character, bounty hunter basically, as the main character, and you end up with a conclusion that is a gunfight at high noon in some old Western town.
There is a slight pacing issue with the book. I think at some point in the middle, there's like this big drag. It's not even a lull between action sequences. I feel like during some of the action sequences themselves, I felt it was already dragging. C. Robert Cargill is a screenwriter. He wrote the Doctor Strange script, if you watched that movie. So there's a very Hollywood cinematic feel to the book. And I feel like the main action sequence at the end, you can hear like the John Williams music that they'd put over the scene. And it's not a negative or a positive critique of it. It's just something like, it's very noticeable. And you were talking about how this book is sort of like a Western. I viewed it as like the Wild West meets like the Borg from Star Trek. So if you like sci-fi, you like the idea of a Western sci-fi robot apocalypse. It's a fun book.
Basically, like the storytelling style and the aesthetic is Western, but everything else is, you know, pretty much your standard post-apocalyptic sci-fi type thing.
Well, it's like how people thought that Logan was a Western.
Aha, yes. It's exactly that same way. That's a very good example. So I really like the main character of the book, Brittle, and it's really neat, actually. So Brittle is a female robot, but it's weird because gender is really meaningless for robots, but they still continue to hang on to it, to the gender that they were assigned by their human masters. And it's kind of just one of those odd little quirky things that was interesting. It also talks about how it goes through what the process of dying is like for a robot. And it's very interesting because they're kind of breaking down piece by piece, and drives fail and memory cores fizzle out. It's really interesting. They begin to actually start to hallucinate as this happens, and this actually reminded me of Good Morning Midnight and the process of death that the main character Augustine goes through, where as his body is failing, his mind begins to kind of make up for the gaps in his consciousness by filling them in with hallucinations and various things, and he begins to see meaning in things that were meaningless to him before. And you kind of start to see the same thing with Brittle and what she goes through. I thought it was really fascinating, actually.
There are a lot of parallels, I think, the author was trying to draw between humanity itself and robots. I mean, not just with when robots fall apart, they're very similar to humans in a way. The whole thing is just a whole conversation about the for the greater good mentality, you know, that shows up in human society, displayed perfectly in Hot Fuzz, and it shows up in this robot society as well. And it's this whole hive mind versus do you want to join the conglomerates and all that sort of thing. In like humanity, like we have to figure out like, do you want to join a corporate world? Your life should be set, or do you want to like go off on your own and do your own thing? And in a lot of ways, it's a parallel between, do they want to join the massive like AI hives, or do they want to be like on their own and the hives are coming and it's making it harder for the little guys to be a thing? And
there's a lot of food for thought with this book. Wasn't my favorite book of the year, but I definitely enjoyed it.
Moving on to the next book. The next book we are going to talk about is also a book on our holiday guide list. It's called The Mosaic. It's by Nina Berkhout. It was a book that we received from the publisher, so thanks for that. It's also one of the best YA books that I read. I did read The Hate You Give after we made the holiday book list, and I thought that was a great book as well, so, I want to throw that out there. But we're talking about The Mosaic, and it's about Halo, Montana. It's a town next to a military base. The future of most of these kids involves either the oil fields, the slaughterhouse, or just enlisting in the military. And you have the main character of the book, her name is Twyla, and she and her boyfriend decide that this is not the life they want to live. Her boyfriend, he came from California, rich, wealthy parents, give him whatever he wants, so the two of them make a dream, like, you know what, we're just gonna take daddy's money, go to California, and start a catering business. Wow, he goes off to college, she'll get the business started, so after he finishes college degree, the business will be there, and he can do, like, his cooking thing and be off the ground. But in the meantime, they need to get through, like, senior year of high school. So the school requires 40 hours of community service to graduate, just like my high school did as well. And Twyla ends up in the Help a Vet program, so she has to help Gabriel, a local vet / former high school football legend who just came back from 2 tours in Iraq. And it sort of brings upon that YA story of a character finding out who they really are, because Twyla is not the type of girl who actually should be going to California with her boyfriend's money and like helping him set up a business while he gets like his actual life started. Shouldn't even be with that guy that she was with, as you can see as the story progresses. And one of the major topics in this book has to deal with the Iraq War. We won't go into any lengthy detail about, but it gives you the different viewpoints of the war and the military itself, because, as I said, this is a military town, and most people see the military as a lifeline. Recruiters swarm the school trying to get students to enlist after they graduate. Teenage girls see themselves as just future mothers of soldiers. A lot of people have views about the people of Iraq that
they're not politically correct views, kind of lacking perspective and compassion.
Well, they have one perspective. And Twyla herself is actually a pacifist. She hates the military. She thinks that everything they do is repugnant. She thinks the war itself is morally repugnant. As someone who's supposed to be helping a vet, their first few interactions do not go off well, because all she does is call him like a murderer and like how it feels to have blood on his hands.
Oh my goodness. Isn't he like going through PTSD?
Yep, she doesn't care.
Oh...
So, like, at one point,
terrible.
I think at one point she asked, like, if he still dreams of, like, killing babies and children, and, like, storms out of the house. And then she's just like, I hope that makes him think about it for a while.
Yeah, it probably does.
Yeah. But eventually, she gets to know Gabriel. What Gabriel is doing is, there's a lot of decommissioned missile silos out in Montana. And his parents' farmland just happens to have one of these missile silos. Inside the missile silo, he's making this huge ammunition mosaic. And it's sort of...
what kind of mosaic?
Ammunition. So he's firing guns, and then he's getting the casings,
okay,
and then he's just putting them on the walls, and they're all, like, different colors. He's making this massive mosaic from, like, the bottom to the top of this silo.
Gotcha.
And he's basically making an homage to Mesopotamia and also, like, his time in Iraq, and he's putting a lot of mythological stories of that area up. He's putting, like, a lot of historical things up, and even some of his experiences in Iraq he put there. And obviously the thing that really scarred him the most mentally is also a part of that mosaic. And Twyla realizes, like, while she is helping him make this mosaic, she's learning a lot about not just Iraq, but Gabriel, the soldier, and the military itself. And she's learning about the world outside of her town and these little dreams that she made, and realizing there's so much more to offer. And then obviously the YA story of, maybe we can save the family farm that's going under. Maybe love stories abound, that sort of stuff. stuff, which kind of ruins it as YA stories do, but the story itself is strong enough that I think it holds up past the YA tropes that are in this book.
Do you think it would have been better to write it as not a YA novel? Or do you think it's important to reach that younger audience?
I always hesitate to say it's important to reach a certain audience because then it comes off as preachy. You write a book and you see who takes for it, and I do think that being a YA book and having some YA tropes does it a disservice. Yeah, this book had a potential to be a lot more than what it was, but at the same time, it's not a bad book, and that's why I've recommended it in our holiday gift guide. That's why I'm reviewing it here. I do think it's an important subject matter for the age group as well. People aren't going to find out things unless they either A, experience it, or B, read about it. And this book offers an opportunity a lot of people don't have. And it opens up people's eyes to something that they would not necessarily read about or experience or be told about. And for someone younger to read it, I mean, I remember when we were younger, the YA genre wasn't quite a thing. So we didn't have many books talking about modern things. So there wasn't that much realistic fiction, contemporary fiction for our time period. This book is about Iraq, which is like, what, a decade ago? So that'd be similar to us growing up in the aughts with something in the 90s. So we'd be reading about, Bosnia or...
the Gulf War.
Yeah, or the Gulf War, yes. Yeah. Even Cold War stuff. And there weren't YA books about that. And do I think it did us a disservice? Maybe. I feel like a lot of what happened in the aughts, growing up as teenagers, we didn't have that perspective of all these like YA books saying, hey, this could have happened, that could have happened, this was going on to the soldiers there, this is the lives of the people in Montana or Wisconsin. Because growing up in New York, it's a very different perspective than someone in North Dakota would get, or someone in Wisconsin would get. So would it be nice for me in high school to have a YA book talking about the Gulf War to broaden my perspective of Iraq, Iran, that entire Middle East area? It would have been really nice, yes. So that's why I think it's important for these YA books to be out here. I do come from an immigrant family, so I do have that broad perspective of understanding that different cultures have different things, different countries have different histories. But I will say that I do have friends whose families immigrated a very long time ago, and this kind of perspective as a teenager would have helped them, because conversing with them now as they are adults, it's a different conversation I'm having. Instead of having that open mind that they could have had reading books like this as a teenager, it's more a teaching type thing as an adult that wouldn't necessarily have to be if they had more of a broader perspective growing up.
If you're growing up, that's the time to broaden your horizons. Once you're getting to our age, you kind of get to be set in your ways.
Exactly. And, that's why a book like this is important. It broadens your horizons. That's the TLDR of this. One of the big things of the book has to deal with the idea of, everyone cheerleads sending troops abroad and the support for the troops. But the big problem is the support for them once they come back. I said that Gabriel had PTSD. Twyla was working for a Help the Vets program. They said that someone would check up on Gabriel to make sure that he was okay and that Twyla was doing her job. But from the beginning to the end of the book, there was no one that went to check up on Gabriel to see how he was. He never got that help that he needed. And as someone who has done work in a psychiatric unit in a VA, I've seen that problem firsthand. I've seen the lack of resources, not just for the veterans themselves, but for the people who want to help them, people who work in healthcare, who really want to help the vets, but, their budget's being slashed. His book makes a point, without outright saying it, that you can send all the money in the world to helping the troops fight their battles abroad, but you need to have some of that money stay at home to help the troops once they come back. And that's a very important point that this book makes without outright saying it. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about, and it's a shame, and the lack of understanding from a lot of people who have the supporting the troops mentality don't seem to grasp. I do feel like this is a point that does need to hit home to not just older people, but to the target audience of this book.
There's some people that think that, maybe these guys should just tough it out or whatever, or they're somehow
weaker.
Weak. Exactly. And, that stigma is also what causes a lot of these people to not go and seek help. But you have to think about it. The end result of a lot of these is sadly that you end up with somebody taking their own life. We should do the best that we can to avoid that. So, yeah, yeah, next time you get a chance to speak to your elected representative, maybe quiz them on where they stand on this issue and what they're willing to do to actually help support our troops after they come home.
Where are they budget-wise in funding this sort of help that they need?
Exactly.
And getting licensed mental health counselors and getting psychiatrists and getting psychologists.
Are they willing to set aside actual money in the actual budget instead of just paying lip service?
More inpatient beds in psychiatric units. There's a lot of substance abuse problems. Maybe more group sessions for that sort of thing. I mean, there's so much to talk about. It encompasses so much, and it's at the very surface. It doesn't go too deep, but it's there, and I think if a teenager read this book, it would just make them think about it. And if you start people thinking young about all these sort of problems, it can only do good for them and the future. I do think it's a good book. I do think that it's a great book for the YA crowd. And, if you just are interested in YA books, like, it's a book worth looking into. I just want to put this book on everyone's radar because it deserves to be out there.
And that Mosaic sounds like a really cool thing. I bet it would be pretty expensive to buy all that ammo.
If you look on Google, there are actually some amazing ammunition mosaics out there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll throw up some links on our blog or something if you guys are interested.
We're going to go into a brief intermission.
And right after the intermission, we're going to be talking about the second installment of the Fear Street Cheerleaders series.
It's Fear Street Cheerleaders, the second evil.
Dun, dun, dun.
I feel as if I'm still fighting the evil, Bobby. I'm still fighting it, even though I sent it down to its grave.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're getting down right into the meat of the podcast. Forgive us if we're a little bit rusty. We've been away from the game for a couple months, but we're ready to roll up our sleeves and dive right in.
Prediction accuracy. So my predictions for this book were that it would be a witchcraft-heavy book. Possession would be a huge part of it. That we would see Sarah Fear, or one of her compadres, and that it'd be a female murderer, a female victim, and the weapon is due to something supernatural, maybe suffocation.
So how'd you do, Anna?
Well, I wasn't that bad.
Yeah? Are you sure?
I mean, possession had something to do with it. Mm-hmm. It was a female murderer.
Okay.
The weapon was due to something supernatural.
Yeah, but those were all dead giveaways, given that it was a sequel to the first Cheerleaders saga book.
I mean, did we see Sarah Fear?
So victim and weapon were wrong. Now, my prediction actually did a little bit better than I have recently.
Well, hold up. How is my weapon wrong? It was something supernatural. Possibly
suffocation.
Okay, you don't know necessarily how that one character died. He could have been suffocated and then thrown into the lake.
No, he drowned. So,
you know what? That is just your supposition.
Okay, so I also said that there's going to be witchcraft, obviously. I went a little further. I said there's going to be a pentagram. There was no pentagram, but we came so close to a pentagram. They sat down in a circle. They had candles. They were holding hands. It was like, ooh, I was just waiting for that pentagram to get drawn, and then they just didn't go that extra step.
I was so pissed during that scene. I was like, they better not draw a pentagram. And I was like, okay, thank goodness they did.
It was really close. I'm going to give myself partial credit on that.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
No. Zero partial credit.
They obviously didn't
What was your next prediction?
All right. So I said that there would be a bigger involvement from the boyfriend factor, and there's just be more male involvement in general. And that was true, actually. You got more involvement from the boyfriend, and you got a big male character coming in, getting involved. And then I got a male victim, and woo! I get double points for that one, because we got 2 male victims in this one. Female murderer. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna beat my chest over that one. We all knew that was gonna happen. And I said the weapon would be fire, which is not true. One of them was opposite of fire.
I think we get the same number of points at the end of this, all your bragging. Plot synopsis.
Once again, we have the return of the spoilery chapter titles. They're not that spoilery. It's not like you can figure out the whole plot of the book. We're now staying with Corky. There's no more of the multiple POV like we had in the first book. Aside from the first chapter, everything is just following Corky's point of view.
So Corky is still reeling from the death of her sister, and the other cheerleaders are trying to get her to rejoin the cheerleading squad to sort of regain normalcy for all of them. Meanwhile, odd injuries and deaths happening to people around make Corky think that maybe what happened a few months back isn't quite finished. So let's get into the characters.
Basically, you got the same old cast from before. So first of all, we got Corky, main character. Let's just do a real quick recap for those of you who don't remember from 2 months ago exactly.
So she has green eyes, high cheekbones, creamy white skin, blonde hair that's very light and fine. She's over her sister Bobby's death, and Bobby was very close with her. And she visits her sister's grave very often, and she still feels like there's evil around.
And it's understandable, by the way. Obviously, her sister only died a few weeks ago in story time.
They have a younger brother named Sean. He plays a lot of practical jokes, he pouts a lot, and he plays video games. He's the stereotypical younger brother in a Fear Street book.
Yep.
And you've got Kimmy Bass. She's captain of the cheerleading team. Once again, round face, topped by a mop of crimped black hair, pink cheeks, and she still has the slightly chunky shape from the last book, but she maybe has lost some weight since then.
So a little bit of a physical change, but other than that, still the same old Kimmy as far as we can tell. Then you got Veronica Mitchell, also known as Ronnie. Not super major role in the book, but curly red hair, tiny round stubborn nose, face full of freckles, looks like she's 12. Deborah, now we got Deborah kind of stepping up and taking a bigger role. She's Ronnie's friend, and she's got straight blonde haircut, very short, with icy blue eyes, a little quiet and a little cold. She's got like this new obsession, understandably. She's now into the occult, and she's got this big old hippie crystal that she wears around her neck.
She keeps bothering Corky about the evil that's around and how she's into the occult and they need to talk about it.
She really wants to like exorcise this demon.
You've also got the two other cheerleaders, Heather Dial and Megan Carmen. The two of them are always together. They don't do anything in this book. They just exist.
Yeah, cheerleader A, cheerleader B.
And then you've got Miss Green, the PE/health teacher, and also the cheerleading coach. Compact, fuzzy brown hair, plain face.
Frizzy.
Right. Husky voice, and she always sounds like she has a bad case of laryngitis. She has a well-deserved reputation for being tough. And now we've got 3 characters that are sort of new. So we start with...
Well, one of them's not new.
Yeah, but he actually has a role in this book. So the first we start with Charles Chasner, a.k.a. Chip.
You guys remember him from last time. He's the captain of the football team and the quarterback also. And he's, a jock. He's tall, athletic, good-looking boy with an open, friendly face, unbrushed, thick brown hair. If you'll recall, he actually broke up with Kimmy and started dating Bobby. And now that Bobby's dead, he's dating her sister Corky.
So he broke up with Kimmy 2 months prior to the start of this book.
Yeah.
So that means the time, as you said, between the second evil and the first evil is very short. But after Bobby died, because he was sort of macking on Bobby, he and Corky got close over their connection of Bobby. And after the funeral, they started hanging out. And I guess the normal thing after hanging out at a funeral is dating. Next, we have Sarah Beth Plummer.
She's a graduate student, and she's doing research on Shadyside history.
She has an old lady voice with a young face, and she's in her 20s.
And then you also have John Daly. It turns out is actually Jennifer's brother. You remember Jennifer is the cheerleader that died in the previous book. John, he's always in trouble. He actually got kicked out of Shadyside for beating up a teacher, ended up having to go to military school. Doesn't buy the story about the evil possessions. Wants to prove that his sister's death was actually the result of foul play.
I mean, if you think about it, that is the first logical thought a character in Fear Street has had.
This is like the one sane person that didn't drink the Kool-Aid.
In-depth plot, part 1. Where is the evil?
So where's the evil? That's the title.
So we're at the start of the book. The main cheerleaders want Corky to rejoin the cheerleading squad. So they're on their way to her house, and they see Corky in the cemetery.
Yeah, they're kind of like creeping on her, like from their car. Corky's sleeping at her sister's grave and having a nightmare. When she wakes up, there's like this guy that is like really menacing, and she ends up getting chased out of the cemetery. And Kimmy, Deborah, and Ronnie are there, but they didn't actually see the guy, and so they're kind of like... probably kind of think that maybe Corky's going a little crazy at this point.
She's like, didn't you see the guy with the hood and pale eyes? And they're like, they're there. Let's take you home.
Yeah.
And they're just like, hey, Corky, you should rejoin us. And Corky's just like, you girls were such bitches. When I first met you, you hated me. You hated my sister. What's the deal? And they're like, no. We've reformed. It's all good. Just join us and everything will go back to normal. And Corky's just like, normal would be my sister not being dead. And they're like,
Yeah.
Yeah, they take her to her house, and Kimmy, Ronnie, they sort of peace out because it's a little uncomfortable, but Deborah wants to stay because she's in this whole occult kick.
Deborah says that the evil actually never left. That evil spirit isn't dead, it's not back in the grave. It's still around somewhere, and she can sense it. You know, this is kind of like a weird and uncomfortable conversation for Corky, and she's saved by the whistle.
Of the kettle.
Yeah, the kettle that she put on. So she goes to the kitchen to, you know, make the hot tea, but just some kind of unexplainable force makes Corky pour the boiling hot water onto her left hand.
So Corky's out of school for a week. Kimmy, Deborah, and Chip are keeping tabs on her. Corky tells Chip that she's seeing a psychiatrist who tells her to, return to a normal routine. So, you know what? She's going to rejoin the cheerleading squad. And she has 2 reasons. 1 is to keep her busy and give her something to think about. And 2, it's to help her find the evil spirit. And I feel like her 2 reasons sort of are contradictory.
Now she knows that Deborah was right and the evil spirit is back. So it does have to be done.
So Corky, when she's telling Chip this, says, you know what? We need to go to the cemetery now so we can tell Bobby that, I'm going to rejoin the cheerleaders. And Chip is just like, I really don't want to go to the cemetery, but okay, let's go.
One of the things that the psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever, the therapist recommends to her is that she needs to stop going to Bobby's grave 10 times a day. Recommends that this is probably not really helping her in like the fragile state that her mind is in right now. So part of this is also she wants to go and say goodbye to Bobby and like apologize for not visiting for the next little bit. It's kind of touching and a little bit sad. So she's there at Bobby's grave and she's kind of apologizing for why she won't be there in the coming weeks and months and how she's trying to get better. And they basically see this weird woman that appears to like almost be floating over Sarah Fear's grave.
Well, it's Sarah Beth Plummer, and she's doing a grave rubbing for a project.
Right, and if you guys know what this is, you take a big old sheet of paper, like newsprint, and then you rub charcoal or graphite on it. The bumps from like all the stuff that's written on the grave get kind of transferred onto the paper. It's like a crappy photocopy. You could just take a photograph. It would probably work just as well.
Corky asks Sarah if Sarah knows anything about Sarah Fear since, she's doing a grave rubbing of Sarah Fear's gravestone.
Right.
And Sarah just goes, you know what? Why don't I talk about everything I know in this like local college hangout place called Alma's? They walk over to this diner with her.
And then Sarah gives Corky and Chip a brief history of Sarah Fear. Basically, Corky feels that there's something off about Sarah Beth. Just the whole time, there's just like something is bothering her, and because of her suspicion, she kind of looks back as they leave the cafe, and Corky thinks that Sarah kind of has like this evil smile on her face when she thinks they're not looking. I don't know, could be suspicious. Maybe she just really liked the coffee she's drinking at the coffee. I mean, it could be anything. Who knows?
Spinning a yarn and amused herself, and these high schoolers ate it up. Anyways, so later the week, Corky joins the girls at her first cheerleading practice, and everyone seems excited to see her.
This is her first day back, and she's all rusty, but they want to do a move that Bobby and Corky showed them previously that they haven't practiced yet, and she hasn't been practicing in forever, but hey, why don't we do this?
And to further distract Corky, Deborah wants to talk about the evil, and Corky's just like, can we just like focus on this cheerleading move? As soon as they start cheering, Corky just hears a girl's shrieks.
So she stops the practice but realizes no one else hears the screaming.
And it happens over and over again. They'll cheer, she hears the screaming, they'll stop, and the shrieking stops.
She can't take it anymore, and she runs out of the gym and bumps right into the same guy who chased her in the cemetery, so turns out he's real.
And then a Scooby-Doo chase scene ensues, and after that chase scene is over, she finds out that the guy is John Daly, Jennifer's brother. And as we said, John is kind of upset that his sister was murdered, thinks that the cheerleaders murdered his sister. He's kind of creepy, he's kind of angry, and Chip shows up that makes John leave.
Yeah, I think he's basically trying to like force Corky to confess.
Right then and there. He introduces himself to her by saying, I'm the evil spirit. And she's just like horrified. She's like, wait, what? He's like, yep, I'm the evil spirit. And she's like about to cry. And he was just like, oh, you do believe in evil spirits, huh? Well, I'm John Daly, and I don't believe your evil spirit story. And I'm going to prove you wrong that you murdered my sister. And there's no such thing as evil spirits.
So later that night, after all the terrible stuff that happened, Corky is driving out to Kimmy's house. And she drives by the cemetery and sees Sarah Beth Plummer and John Daly, and they're hanging out in the cemetery like late in the evening, and Sarah Beth is doing a weird dance around the gravestones as John watches. It's like, What? Okay, that's weird. Why are those two hanging out?
And that's the end of part 1. We start part 2. Here is the evil.
Fast forward to back in school again, and Corky is taking a makeup science test, and the teacher, Mr. Adams, leaves to get his car fixed.
That's what teachers do during makeup tests. Anyways, during the test, these weird things start happening. Like the door slams shut, the Venetian blinds all close and open at once, the overhead lights begin to flicker.
The glass lids pop off the specimen jars, the glass case shatters, and 24 frogs escape. And a cow eyeball rolls out.
The blinds are still opening and closing, and they're sort of like billowing even though the windows are closed, and this sour, foul odor fills the room.
And then, this is like a biolab, I guess, so they have a human skeleton, and of course the hand from the skeleton floats over.
The headless skeleton is just like shaking on the stand, trying to get off.
And then the hand slams into Corky, grabbing her by the throat, and begins to squeeze her throat and choke her. She's able to kind of like grab the hand by the fingers and kind of break the bones off and escape that way.
So she runs to a wood shop where Chip is supposed to be, and he was going to take her back home after her test. So she runs to the wood shop and she hears this high-pitched roar with a steady whine. And then she looks down and sees a dark puddle.
Yeah, and it's blood. And basically Chip is lying face down in the blood. Basically this power saw that's just running. That's the sound shield. It's the motor of the saw. And he has cut off his hand at the wrist and bled to death. And the hand is just right there next to the spinning blade. And he's just lying on the ground, handless. I just saw the weird parallel, too, between, like, how the hand came off of the skeleton and tried to choke her. And Chip's hand got cut off simultaneously. Isn't that interesting? I didn't notice that little parallel there before.
So do you think that skeleton was the writhing body of Chip?
I think so.
As like he's trying to escape
I
mentally?
think the spirit needed to use somebody else's spirit to like power the skeleton to make it move. Probably like killed Chip and used his soul to like give life to the skeleton.
So you flash forward to Chip's funeral.
Yeah, so Deborah gets Corky to go to a diner with her after the funeral. Deborah's got some cockamamie schemes she wants to talk about, how there's an evil spirit still around. Corky agrees and says that the evil revealed itself to her. Tells Deborah about the science test and about Sarah Beth and John.
The next logical thing is Deborah, Kimmy, and Corky go to Simon Fear's burnt-out mansion to locate the evil spirit.
Of course.
And Kimmy thinks this is a complete waste of time, and the entire time she's just like, what
bitching
are we
about
doing? It's cold, it's gross, like we're wasting our time.
Smells.
Can't we just go eat food?
Yeah.
Corky just wants to find the evil spirit, and Deborah is so tired of Kimmy's bullshit. She's just like, you know what? I'm very serious about fighting this spirit, and I think they're doing a seance, but they don't call it a seance. They're sitting in that circle. There's like a hole in the floor, and
There's almost a pentagram.
They got a trigram. Deborah is doing her chanting thing, and all of a sudden they see a shape rising from the hole. The three of them like, holy shit, it's the evil spirit. It's a stray dog.
Aww.
It starts licking Kimmy's face. And Kimmy's like, wow, what a great job we've done. I'm gonna go take a hot bath now. Peace out.
Yeah. So then Deborah and Corky decide to go and check on John Daly to see what he was doing with Sarah Beth. But it turns out that John's been missing for the past 2 days.
It's such a sad scene. His parents open the door and they're like, oh, you want to talk about John? Great. He's been missing for 2 days. You know where he is? And they're like, no?
Yeah, so they just lost their daughter like a month ago, and now this bullshit happens with their son.
Corky and Deborah meet at the Alma coffee shop, which is where Sarah Beth Plummer had taken them, and they want to see what Sarah Beth knows. So they kind of figure out where Sarah Beth lives based on what she was telling them the other day. They actually just go to her apartment unannounced, and she's just like, okay, whatever, just come on in.
And so now Corky asks to know more about Sarah Fear, and as Sarah goes to turn off the stove, Corky accidentally knocks over a bunch of papers in the mail, and they're all addressed to Sarah Fear. And it turns out that Sarah is actually Sarah Fear, but not the same one we've been talking about this whole time.
She uses her mother's maiden name because the Fear name is just not something you want to have in Shadyside. And she says that she knew John Daly in high school, and they dated for a while, but then they lost touch.
Yeah, and then John called up, and so they met in the cemetery, and John asked if Sarah knew anything about what happened to his sister, because they're kind of blaming Sarah Fear's evil spirit or something. So John wants to know if Sarah knew how to summon spirits, and he was really insistent. So she claims that he was like coming on so hard about this whole spirit summoning thing that she just had to like make up this weird dance. It was just something she made up. This whole story doesn't hold up. there's something she's not telling them.
Well, that's exactly what Corky thinks.
So Sarah tells them more about Sarah Fear, like basically the complete story. We'll delve into this a little bit later during the, the mythos discussion. But for now, let's just talk about what happens afterwards. The girls regroup and they begin to draw some parallels between the Sarah Fear story that they got from Sarah Beth and what's happening to them in the present. And they start to see, some parallels.
Well, Kimmy calls Corky that night and tells her that John Daly has been found dead in Fear Lake. We're fast forwarding. Corky is cheering at a Shayside High basketball game. It's her comeback game. Her parents are there. They want to see their daughter cheerlead for the first time since her sister's death.
That big signature move that they got going on.
They do the pyramid, and Corky needs to jump down into Kimmy's arms.
Except we all know where this is going. Kimmy's gonna be frozen, not catch Corky,
who ends up crashing into the ground and has to go to the ER for bruised ribs and a broken arm.
I think we all saw that coming. That was kind of a parallel with the previous book. Fast forward to Corky is discharged from the hospital and goes home. She's got this cast and everybody wants to sign it or whatever, but she's going to the bathroom and she wants to take a bath. As she's filling up the bathtub with hot water, turns out Kimmy is in the bathroom with her.
I wanted to get rid of you forever, she said coldly, speaking in a low, husky voice. Corky backed up against the closed bathroom door. Kimmy, what? What are you saying? You're frightening me. Kimmy's normally pink cheeks flushed scarlet. I'm not Kimmy, she announced in the strange, husky voice. Kimmy, listen, Corky started. Her ribs ached. Pain throbbed down her arm. I'm so tired. You didn't cooperate, Kimmy said, taking a step toward Corky. You were supposed to die, like your sister. Now, wait, Corky cried. Kimmy? I'm not Kimmy, she snarled, then let out a roar that blew away all the steam. I am what you fear most.
This is the big reveal. The evil spirit has been in Kimmy since the night at the cemetery, and she's responsible for all the deaths. Now you realize that the motives for the killings are pretty much the same as in the previous book. She's killing her host body's enemies.
She killed Chip for dumping Kimmy. She killed John for following Kimmy. I think her reason for killing Corky was more selfish than for Kimmy. She wanted to kill Corky because Corky wanted to destroy the spirit.
So now it comes time, after all the exposition, to kill Corky. So through Kimmy's body, the evil spirit forces Corky's head into the tub of hot water. You get the whole life flash before her eyes.
More pictures raced through her mind. A jumble of faces. She saw her family. She saw Sean. Sad-faced Sean. Now he won't get to sign my cast, she thought. He'll wake up, and I'll be dead. Dead, dead, dead. And Sean will be alone. No, a voice screamed in her head. No, I can't let this happen. I can't let the evil win again.
Her fear turns to anger, and her anger turns to rage. And with all her strength, she swings her cast into evil Kimmy and just kind of knocks her out a little bit, stuns her. So then she grabs Kimmy by the hair and shoves her face into the steaming hot water. It's her turn to be drowning her. Kimmy/evil spirit struggles as Corky chants, "Drown, drown, drown!"
So finally, a raging wind pours from Kimmy's mouth into the water. And the wind so hot and so fierce, the water boils and bubbles. The room begins to steam up. There's a thick, white, scalding hot cloud, thicker than any fog. But Corky begins choking from this fog because it's so thick. But you know what? She just keeps Kimmy's head underwater. And wouldn't this be a great time for her parents to walk in?
That would just ruin everything because they would prevent her from killing the evil spirit, and she would get sent off to a psychiatric hospital or something. It would be pretty bad.
But good thing that doesn't happen.
Yeah, good thing she gets to get away with this murder. So finally, Kimmy's body kind of just goes limp.
A disgusting green liquid poured from her mouth. The stench of it rose up from the tossing water. The thick green liquid oozed out of Kimmy's mouth, took shape, formed a long snake-like figure. Longer, longer. It coiled around the bottom of the tub. More rolled out of Kimmy's mouth. Drown, drown, drown! Please drown! Corky screamed, leaning on Kimmy's head with the cast. She reached down and pulled open the drain. She heard a gurgling sound and stared in disbelief as the foul-smelling green liquid snake was sucked down the drain.
Well, lucky for Corky, Kimmy actually regains consciousness and doesn't actually die right here in her bathroom, because otherwise it would totally look like some kind of revenge killing for dropping her. Once she comes to, Kimmy actually doesn't know where she is. And the last thing she remembers was the finale of the previous book, where she shows up at the cemetery right during the final showdown with the spirit. And so she doesn't remember anything after that. The whole, month that has passed, maybe more, maybe 2 months, doesn't remember a thing. Corky is now convinced that the evil is finally gone. She's vanquished it once and for all. Not like last time.
And she's all happy. Mrs. Corcoran finds Kimmy and sends Kimmy on her merry way. And Corky's just like, you know what? I can finally get a good night's sleep.
But the next day, she finds a hand-printed envelope with no return address. And when she opens it up, there's a note there, and it says,
"It can't be drowned."
Who saw that one coming? Anybody that listened to Sarah Beth's story where Sarah Fear drowns, but clearly her evil spirit is still around. So, yeah, that one probably wasn't going to work out too hot.
Well, let's do some nitpicks.
All right.
Okay, what kind of teacher leaves a student alone to take a test? And not only leaving the student alone, the teacher leaves the school to get his car looked at.
Is complete BS. And then you also have an unsupervised kid working alone in the wood shop, late at night. Yeah, I mean, think about it. This kid ends up dying, right? This school would get sued into oblivion. Also, you got this, college kid neighborhood of, community college kids. First of all, we weren't even sure that there was a community college in Shadyside. There might have been one, one town over, which is okay, why are they then living in Shadyside in this one neighborhood? But whatever. It's not even college housing or anything. It's just, I guess they're renting places all in this one area. It's kind of weird. And then riffing off of that, we got Sarah Beth is a grad student. So, grad student where? Because community college doesn't have graduate programs. Again, we did hear earlier there was a university nearby, one town over. And this was the cover for the FBI agent in Missing. But then why is she living in the local community college neighborhood area? Is she not taking regular classes and she's doing field work for her graduate degree? Is that what she's doing? Because, she's investigating the history of Shadyside supposedly. So she's taking a semester to go do field research for some kind of credit in some course doing field work. I mean, she's a Fear, right? So she's going to be going probably to some really fancy private school, super expensive. You figure their history program might have some kind of weird thing where you go and do field research for a few credits.
Mythos.
Yeah, so we got some callbacks. So, callback to Secret Bedroom and Party Summer.
Eric Bishop breaks up with Kari Taylor to date Deborah.
We also have Suki Thomas. No Fear Street book would be complete without Suki Thomas. Giving Gary Brent a sex ed lesson.
In the library. Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Quirky psychiatrist Dr. Stern is actually the same psychiatrist that Maira saw for a while.
Yeah, back in Sleepless Nights or whatever.
Sleepwalker.
Right.
We've got the Guardians of Fear Street, the dog, at the Simon Fear mansion.
That dog, they were trying to figure out where Sarah Fear's spirit was, and the dog licks Kimmy's face.
Let's really get into the Simon Fear, Sarah Fear story.
The first most glaringly obvious thing about the Simon Fear, Sarah Fear story is that it contradicts the Simon Fear myth as told by, I guess, Simon Fear in Party Summer. So his grandnephew or something is retelling the story, and it's not what we hear from Sarah Fear.
Sarah Beth Plummer.
Yeah, isn't that weird now, right? Because we have a Simon Fear, and now we have a Sarah Fear, and they both exist in the previous timeline, and they both exist in the current 90s timeline.
Sounds like one of those families that just keeps reusing names.
Yeah.
So the story we get here is Simon Fear. He's a mysterious man who built an enormous mansion back in the woods. And after the tragedy of losing his children and his wife, eventually a mill was built in the area. The city built a road through the woods right past Fear Mansion, and they called it Fear Street. Now, Sarah Fear, a lot about her is from her cousin Ben Fear's journal. Now, she's described as a lovely flower of a young woman, beautiful in every way. She's kind, generous, and she was happily married for a short time. She married the grandson of Simon Fear, which is interesting because weren't Simon Fear's children killed young?
Exactly. Everything up till now meshes, and now you get this, where he already has children, and those children have grandchildren, and those grandchildren are actually getting married. And the weird thing is, we actually find out that Simon Fear was actually alive at this time.
Sarah and the grandson lived in a house near Simon's mansion. It was a large house on Fear Lake. The house was always filled with people, cousins, friends, servants. It's actually described very similarly to the Simon Fear mansion. Just a lot of parties, right?
Yep.
But tragedy struck. The husband died suddenly of pneumonia just 2 years after marriage, leaving Sarah Fear quite wealthy. So after mourning for a year, she resumed her busy life. The house was always filled with people again. Her 2 brothers moved in, as well as several cousins. But in 1899, Sarah fell deathly ill, and it was described as a wasting disease. The doctors gave up on her. She was given up for dead. The grave was dug. The minister was called to prepare for a funeral. But Sarah didn't die. She made a remarkable recovery. Her strength returned overnight. She pulled herself out of bed the next day and returned to running the house. But the thing is, after the illness, she became a different person. She became withdrawn and reclusive. She had a terrible temper and threw temper tantrums for no reason. She turned away all her friends. And she was rumored to be in love with a servant. And there were reports of strange gatherings, late-night meetings, seances, wild parties. And the police reports were very discreet because Simon Fear was still around. But there were newspaper stories of gossip, of the going-ons in Sarah's house. A kitchen maid was found murdered in the garden, stabbed through the heart with hedge shears. House guests were murdered, legs severed, cleanly cut off his body, found lying beside him on the floor of the stables. Later in 1899, she was still in her 20s, she died under mysterious circumstances. You see, the Fear family pleasure boat capsized on Fear Lake on a calm, sunny summer day. The lake was flat, and there were no other boats. A mysterious hurricane-force gale capsized the boat. All on board drowned. Sarah, her brother, her niece, nephew, and a servant. All within view of shore, which is a 5 to 10 minute swim. When the bodies were pulled ashore, their skin bright red, blistered, scalding hot, as if from boiling water. So obviously with something like that, the stories after about Sarah Fear persisted. Maybe Sarah and her servant were lovers. Because they were lovers, their ghosts were seen walking around town long after her death.
This story is told by Sarah Beth Plummer, and it is based on all the research that he's been doing over the last little bit in Shadyside. And so she's combed through all the newspaper gossip columns from the 1890s, and she's figured this out.
She has the journal stuff too.
There's a couple things we can pull out here that actually mesh with what we've already seen. So first of all, there's more evidence here that this is the exact same spirit that's causing all of these things to happen that we're dealing with here. The whole part where she has a fever and she's about to die and everyone thinks she's going to die. She probably did die, and then her dead body is then inhabited by the spirit. We saw this in the first book. Jennifer died, and then her body is inhabited by the spirit. Everyone thinks she's still alive, but she's not.
I have to put it out there. I have read The Third Evil, and I'm not chiming in this section of our podcast because I know things in that book will add or change our mythos, and I don't want to change anything that Serge has to say here, so I will just stay silent.
Okay, so now I guess my mythos rant for the day is also like a prediction accuracy thing. Thanks for that, Anna. The other thing that I think makes sense is kind of like the death toll. You see kind of a murder spree going on. There's a kitchen maid, there's a house guest, they're just found murdered in inexplicable circumstances. And these seem like pretty much the kind of stuff we're seeing now. We're seeing people basically made to kill themselves in gruesome ways. And this is probably the same kind of stuff that was happening back then. And then finally, the death on a pleasure boat. Now, what do we see here? We see they're in the middle of the lake, and it's a calm day, there's no wind, the surface is flat, and you get this gale force wind. Well, that's clue number one. Clue number two is the bodies look like they were boiled. The water's boiling, and there's a wind blowing. Well, what does this sound exactly like? Oh yeah, it sounds exactly like when Corky tried to drown Kimmy. What probably might have happened is that somebody was actually on to the spirit back then and actually tried to drown Sarah Fear's possessed corpse. And what you would get is exactly the same thing that happened in the bathroom, except it wasn't an enclosed space. So the gale force wind could have taken on a larger proportion and actually capsized the boat, and the water would have still been boiling. The exact parallel to the bathroom scene, except if it happens outdoors on the lake. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that we actually have the clues for the parallels between the spirit attacks that are happening today and what was going on back then 100 years ago. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. Sarah Beth Plummer's research seems to kind of corroborate what the kids are seeing. If we take the route of being like suspicious about Sarah Beth Plummer, and we just actually notice the parallels, right? We have the Simon Fear of today ends up being kind of crazy and evil in his own special way. So you have to wonder if the Sarah Fear of today also has her own flaw, some kind of evil thing that she's doing, maybe. And if that's the case, she could just be covering for herself by telling a story that meshes with what the kids are seeing and what happened long ago, and just basically making it look like this is all Sarah Fear's spirit. But in actual fact, maybe it's more connected to Sarah Beth Plummer. Or maybe she's not, and you have the fact that she just did really good research, and you have all of this evidence back then for the paranormal that is meshing with the paranormal events coming in today. In which case, you should probably, interview Corky, because Corky knows a lot about what's going on right now and has seen some stuff. This might provide her with more info for her research that she's doing.
Do you think any PhD advisor would be okay with her reference being a teenager talking about having her friends possessed by an evil spirit?
Well, yeah. Wasn't there that professor in Columbia that was really into the paranormal and actually started a ghost busting company? So assuming that professor is her advisor, then, we're in good shape.
This is Daniel Jackson levels of absurdity.
I guess we'll find out in the third book. So, last time we got into the mythos, I had floated this theory about how there's 3 opposing forces on Fear Street, all of them influenced by and also trying to influence this raw, psychic, psychokinetic kind of energy that's somehow there in the soil in Fear Street. We think it might have to do with a mineral type of clay deposit. Something is in there contaminating the soil, maybe even the water, and it causes paranormal things to occur. The idea is that over time, because I'm assuming this has always been the case for millennia, all the living things that live there will gradually start to adapt to it and may in fact begin to be in tune and kind of strike an ecological balance with these forces. And that's faction 1. And then faction 2 is the human element. When the first settlers come and discover this area, Simon Fear actually taps into this power and discovers its true potential and begins to be really the first human to try to find the true potential of this mineral deposit and use it for his own personal gain. I mean, that's basically how he becomes fabulously wealthy. And finally, you have in the modern day the corporation, which is trying to repeat Simon Fear's success and harness this resource for their own gain. We do have a question now of, is there a fear faction presence in the current era? Because you have the Fears and all the things they did back in the 1800s, and that still has repercussions to this day. And I'd originally thought that evil spirit was somehow unlocked through some kind of experiment that Simon Fear was doing, or maybe his grandson was doing. That was the Fear faction influence in this present day, but it turns out we actually have a living Fear character active in the present timeline, Sarah Fear. Which side is she on? Is she just a neutral bystander? Is she solidly in the Fear faction? Or was she hired by the corporation? We're not sure yet. Maybe Anna can already answer that question, but she's gonna, hold her tongue until our next episode. So, 90s things.
Sean is playing Mega Man 2 on Nintendo, and he also gets his sister to play a Nintendo basketball game with him.
Yeah, which has no save game or pause.
NES had pause.
Well, this thing doesn't. What were your thoughts on the book?
The cheerleading chants are far worse in this book.
Yeah, I think that was my first reaction upon completing this book. Oh
Razzmatazz.
God. Razzmatazz. We already complained about how awful the chants were in the previous book, and he just went over and above the Call of Duty on this one and just made them especially awful. I actually kind of look forward to seeing how really, truly shitty the chants are going to be in the final book.
I thought it moved a lot faster than the first book because you don't need to introduce all these characters. You already know these characters, so he just gave a brief character description for each of them. It would come up later oh, her crimped black hair was blah blah blah, instead of doing his little list thing that he tends to do.
Yeah.
So it sort of flowed a lot better without having these long-winded character descriptions.
That did really help, and it kind of makes me wish that he just kept a continuing story going. But I guess his stories are kind of limited in scope and don't lend themselves to a long arc. I mean, this one's working, right? But it probably works just for 3 books and basically that's it.
It feels like there's more more to come with Sarah Beth Plummer. I think there were some clues in the book that it was Kimmy who was possessed. Like you said, the dog licking her face.
Yeah.
And also her complete reticence to even doing that weird-ass seance thing.
So this is going back to, like, thoughts in the book and how I felt reading the book. This is one of those books where I didn't actually even care who it was that much. You begin to see, like, okay, it's probably not the guy. He was such an obvious red herring. That made his character almost completely useless. And then Sarah Beth Plummer, like, she's mysterious, but you don't really think that she's necessarily the spirit incarnate or anything like that. I mean, maybe I was a little bit suspicious of her. You do kind of think it might be Kimmy, simply because of process of elimination. I didn't see any of the clues. The dog licking her face, I'm only picking that up now in retrospect. For me, I didn't get as invested in trying to figure out who it was this time around. I kind of just breezed through the book. It was a really quick read, actually. Probably the fastest read of any of the Fear Street books for me. I'm usually a slower reader. It usually takes me about 3 hours, so this one went like, whoa. The next point we were going to bring up, and this is a funny question that Anna had, are Megan and Heather ever going to be more developed? I'm thinking now that they're just spare ammunition for our next book. You know, you got to keep somebody around to get murdered. You've already murdered everybody else, so I guess they're just going to be the red shirts in the next book.
Another point I had to make was, is Deborah just really bad at the occult stuff? Because you figure John Daly was murdered because he was stalking Kimmy, and the spirit said, oh no, he was following her and he was just too close to the truth. Does that mean the spirit saw Heather's stuff and was like, this girl has nothing on, like, seances?
LOL.
Yeah.
LOL.
Just for, like, shits and giggles kept her around because it just didn't matter. And I also thought that John Daly was completely unnecessary unless it comes back in the next book. I guess his character was there to show us how readily Shadyside residents accept bonkers theories. Like, think about it. He knows Jennifer's cause of death was an evil spirit because that's what his parents told him, and that's what the police report must say.
Yep.
None of the adults are just like, an evil spirit? Come on, girls. What really happened? Cast suspicion. They're just like, it's an evil spirit. Shrugs. He's back going, no, this is bullshit.
I mean, honestly, what he should be doing is he should be trying to get some kind of federal oversight on this police department, which is clearly falsifying police records with these bullshit reports about possession killings. You could get the Department of Justice to come down on these people. Oh, wait, we think the corporation might be, working with the government, so maybe that won't happen. So yeah, this is the story of what happens when you don't drink the Kool-Aid and you don't fall for all of this. You get crushed by the system. Getting rid of him was advantageous for all the factions involved.
How many grave rubbings would you give this book?
This book would warrant a standard 2 grave rubbings out of 5. It was like one of the good ones. It wasn't awful. I'm not going to knock it down to a 0 or something. It's definitely not a 3, which is the highest I'd ever give a Fear Street book. Well, it's the highest I've ever given a Fear Street book. I don't know. Maybe he'll blow me away with something down the line. What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I definitely give it 2 grave rubbings out of 5 as well. And I'm on the Fear Street scale.
Oh, so you actually liked it less than I did.
Yeah, I wasn't really drawn in. It was a fast read, but I feel like it suffered from middle book syndrome.
Yeah.
Having read the third book, I know how it connects, but even with that kind of hindsight, I don't think it was that great a book. I think it could have been a duology, having read the third book. Like, I know what happened, and it's like, well, you didn't really need this book, did you?
Well, I'm sure he needed the money, and...
Well, I think he needed the further development of the characters, and that's the only thing that this book lends.
And by the way, that's something you don't get in any other Fear Street book. The reason I'm giving this thing 2 stars is I really appreciate that he's doing this trilogy format. You do get more character development. You do get to skip the ridiculous character introductions with sometimes unintentional sexism and stuff like that, and you just skip right to the story and you start to figure out what's going on. I like that. I also like the new infusion of information regarding the Fear Street mythos we get here. We get a second alternative Fear origin story. So now we have 2 competing narratives. This is really great. This is kind of how a mythological body of work exists in the real world. You have different variants and different retellings, and they all complement each other to a certain extent. As you begin to see more and more of them, it builds a greater whole and gives you a better perspective of what's actually going on. I really appreciate that. Moving on, what are your predictions for the third book?
Alright, so what we did was, we were going to read the books back to back, do the outlines, and then do the recordings. So what we did was, we actually made predictions of the covers a while back, before I read the third book, so we could be fresh and not know anything about the books. So these predictions were all written down before I read the book, and I'll just read word for word what I had predicted, so it won't be influenced by what I know now.
Yeah, and actually, why don't I go first? In my written description here, we actually talk about what the cover looks like. So the cheerleader on the cover is wielding pom-poms and doing a split over Seraphir's freshly dug grave. Well, looks like Seraphir's freshly dug grave. What it really is just a freshly dug grave with a tombstone. You don't see what it says on the tombstone. And there's a pennant like just sticking out of the ground that says "Go Team." It's kind of kitschy. I think it's going to be obvious to everybody that Seraphir, evil spirit, is not gone. Last time, her grand wind of death exit, she simply jumped to the nearest body, which happened to be Kimmy. And so our two options are either Corky or her brother. And I was kind of undecided as to which of them was going to get possessed. They were both in the house. They were both pretty close proximity. So I guessed that it's Sean, but really it's just as equally likely to be Corky in my opinion. I think there's going to be a dead cheerleader because the Carcorans are going to blame the other cheerleaders, and Seraphir likes to punish the host's enemies. So because they still probably blame the cheerleaders for Bobby's death, that's what's going to happen. And the murder weapon is going to be a cheer routine, right? We've already seen this twice. We've tried to have 2 murder by cheerings in the past, so the evil spirit is probably going to go for a 3rd time's the charm and try to do it again. And the murder victim is going to be female, and the murderer is going to be a possessed male. Again, going back to I picked Sean.
Alright, doing my word-for-word reading of what I had written before I read the book. So everything's all good and fair. I won't ad-lib or add anything.
Okay, and I'll yell if you do.
The evil spirit is obviously still around and possessing someone. I think Deborah's occult fascination will come back and play a bigger role. There will be a showdown in the cemetery. This time, you see the evil spirit go down the drain, so it could be anyone with indoor plumbing. The spirit will be gunning for Corky because 3rd time's the charm? More than one murder attempt, gruesome factor, ++++. Multiple attempted murder victims, male, plus female. Murderer is possessed, female. Murder weapon is supernatural. I'm sensing something near the water, perhaps Fear Lake. There will be a bloody death as well. And that is my prediction.
Alright, that's it guys. We're super excited to be back in the saddle again.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you haven't unsubscribed from us, we really appreciate it.
Here we are again, we're right back at it, and here's looking forward to another year of Fear Street reviews. Happy 2018, everybody. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to another thrilling episode of Rhett Read Podcast.
If you like what you hear, give us a shout out.
If not, let us know why in the comments.
Don't forget to rate, review, comment, share, like, and subscribe.
You can follow us at Rhett Read Podcast on Twitter and Facebook.
Or send suggestions or fan mail to red.read.podcast@gmail.com.
Until next time.
Peace!